Joining us this hour from Shreveport's Praise Temple, Bishop Larry Brandon.
Yes.
And we are going to wax very serious here for a couple of seconds. And that means we're going to talk about Baton Rouge.
Baton Rouge, yes.
And I want to read something that you wrote last evening. And I'm not going to read it all, but I want you to talk about it. And I want you to tell me, I want you to explain and expound.
Sure.
As only you can. You wrote last evening, "My heart is heavy for the Baton Rouge, Louisiana families impacted by the senseless act that resulted in death. Because of this horrible act, I question the silence of those whom we call church, civic, and community leaders. We must positively address and educate all citizens. God help us and guide us." And then you have a quote from Psalms, "They that sow in tears shall reap in joy." Talk about that for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, well, and my heart is so heavy. And even in the, I just was reading up, I didn't read the whole this morning on the Minnesota issue, Minnesota shooting. And it's just very, very disturbing. My heart goes out for both families that impacted. You know, not only Alton, but the police.
Sterling, yeah.
Yeah, Alton Sterling, but the police officers, their family as well. It was, of course, from my vantage point, it was a senseless act, jumping on this individual. If they've tased him, there's some certain other measures, you know, speaking, I won't mention his name, with a police officer friend of mine. There's certain other measures that could have been taken, and that, of course, it wouldn't have resulted in death. But I hear the cries of the people. And it's quite emotional for me because there's some, you know, there are those who will rise up in anger and hate. And I'm not about anger and hate on both sides of the fence, from African Americans or Eurocentrics, Asian Americans or Hispanic Americans. That it's a people thing, and it's a shame what's happening because per capita, it appears per capita that the African American males are being targeted. Racial profiling, and you name it. And I'm just quite disturbed, and I'm sharing my challenge, if you would, to the leaders is that our community leaders, our church leaders as well, and it doesn't matter what color you are, we should be speaking out against the injustices in the land. That's what I'm encouraging people to do.
Pardon me, that was what about what you posted last evening?
Yes.
I'll read it again. "I question the silence of those whom we call church, civic, and community leaders."
Absolutely.
Explain to everybody exactly what you mean by that.
Sure.
In your mind, in Baton Rouge, across the country perhaps, what should the church, civic, and community leaders be doing?
Well, we can't sit back silent. We have to speak up. We have to address. We can't sweep certain discussions under the rug anymore. We have to speak up and come together because we're better together. This happened. Let's educate our people positively.
Tell me what that means.
Because there's a lot of anger on both sides of the fence. There's a lot of anger. There are those people who hate. There's some whites who hate. There are blacks who hate, Hispanics and Asians who hate. And so this is the time for the church especially. We can't afford to be silent. We need to speak up. We need to educate and help quell some of this, help quell some of the violence that's going on.
Knowing you as well as I do.
Yes.
You are a man who there is a consistency to your life and your point of view and your arguments.
Yes.
That I and a whole hell of a lot of people in Shreveport and around this area respect.
Thank you.
But one of the arguments you're going to hear, one of the points that you're going to hear being made, in fact, last night and probably until this quiets down just a little bit, when you call for church leaders, community leaders to speak out,
yes,
there are people who will say, you know, in Chicago every weekend, there's 10 black kids that are shooting 10 more black kids.
Right. Right.
How come nobody's jumping up and down and screaming and yelling about that? You, as a community leader, as a church leader, you're screaming and yelling and jumping up and down about that all the time. Damn. But there are others who do not.
And that's my point.
How do you respond to that argument?
And that's my point. We can't afford to remain silent on any issue. If another white, if you would, kill another white, we can't sit back and say, well, that's a white problem. If another Asian kills another Asian or Hispanic kills, no, we need to speak up against any and all violence. Of course, I have friends I talk to all the time. In fact, a friend, John Abercrombie out of Chicago, I was speaking to him last evening. There's some things we're talking about doing because, again, he's going through the thick of it in Chicago. So we have to speak up and educate because there's a lot of people angry. And if we as leaders are not speaking up, it doesn't matter what church or what governmental institution we represent or community we represent, we need to speak up now. Although, this situation happened because, again, the reason for me speaking out because of people at a boiling point, and we certainly don't want a Ferguson issue in Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
I'm going to read to you because I read your Facebook post from last evening. And I have a friend, Crystal, and she put this up earlier this morning. And I'm going to read this to you. The world is keeping me up tonight. I feel a lot of hopelessness and despair. I feel so sad. I feel sad for that young teen I watched on TV cry for his daddy.
Yeah.
I feel so uneasy about this tension. I feel so hopeless because I know what I see and process and don't know what to do about it or how to explain to people because it's clear a lot of folks have two opinions to the extreme about what happened not only here, but what's happening in America.
Yes.
And she goes on, and it is extremely articulate and well thought out. And you said a couple of seconds ago before we went to the break, and I don't know if we're going to have time for you to finish your thought, but we certainly can when we come back again. And you were talking about speaking on the phone with a friend of yours last evening. And I'm going to ask you, how many of your friends, professional colleagues, members of your congregation, did you speak to yesterday? Text, phone, social media, fill in the blank. And how many of those, and I certainly don't mean this in a disrespectful way, how many of those did you talk in off the ledge?
Well, I spoke to maybe one or two yesterday because we're just coming in off vacation, and I limited my, conversations. And of course, I like to read up and get as much information as possible. But those that I spoke to yesterday in regard, of course, clearly they're upset not about only the woes of the country, but the evil and the anger in the world. Those that I spoke to.
You have talked about that. Yeah. Yes. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, those that I spoke to. But looking at social media, there's just a lot of anger. It's clear people are angry. And, you've asked the last segment, what about Chicago? My friend, he's angry about the senseless violence in Chicago. However, when you look at this particular situation, we're in our mind, the police are to protect and to serve. But I don't want our community to glump all police just because a few did make the proper decision. There are those who panic. There are those who are just plain evil. And there are those cops that are just corrupt, just like there's corrupt preachers, there's corrupt DJs, and you name it. And so you just can't, and correct medical and lawyers, and the list goes on. So you just can't lump everyone judge everyone by the acts of a few. And so I want all leaders to speak out, to educate positively, to educate the community, to inform them that there's something that justice will be served, that something's going to be done about evil, period, not these particular situations. Because even when I was in Nigeria, we were dealing with Boko Haram. They had to kidnap those girls over there, and the list goes on. But do you blame all Muslims or people of Islamic backgrounds because of a few? No, you don't. And so that's my point is, let's speak up, let's educate. We just can't sit silent and just let it blow. And even in this situation, next month, there will be some other news. But are we not going to pay attention to this situation and follow this thing through to make sure justice is served? Even in Chicago, that some mother cried last month because her child was killed. Are we going to forget about that mother and her pain and what she's going through because there's new news? We got to educate.